YouTube, we have a cleaned up case. More cleaned up parts. So we got a lot of parts here to put back together. First thing you want to do is get a couple blocks of wood, 2x4, 4x4. 4x4s is what everyone seems to use. I'm using 2x4s. We'll see how that works. Because things like the idler shaft will go through and then come out the bottom down here. You can see my finger. You know, so you want to kind of get it spaced up some. I took the case, I didn't pressure wash it, I parts washed it and scraped most of the crud and grime off of it. So it's pretty clean. I'm going to spray bomb Rust-Oleum the whole thing black when it's done. You know, but it is what it is. And it should work. You know, you don't need to clean it. But I wanted a little cleaner. I just wanted the layers of crud off of it. Doing something that I want to work on. But it's not perfectly clean, perfectly pretty. So, now you know the orientation. Bottom of the case towards you. Drain plugs up. Alright. So, you want to take your idler shaft and put this back in. I'm going to clean up these bearings real quick. Just make sure there's nothing bad on them and the gears. You know, give a good look over. Bearings seem to not have any play. And there's no weird wear. So we should be fine with those. It's a whole order this goes in. If you do take it apart, we'll show you here quick. Oh, hopefully. There you go. You have a race on either end. And then it goes bearing, shims if yours has any. It would appear mine does not. Right. Yes, it does. My shims happen to be on the other side. These are shimmed from the factory to where they need to be. So what that means is you may have 2 shims on each side. You may have 1 shim on each side. You may have 1 and 2. You know, there's a bunch of different combinations of shims you could have. Mine happens to be 2 on one side, none on the other. So that's what we're going to run with. As long as you put it back in the same way it came out. So I'm going to clean up the top of this bearing a bit. Okay, there we go. And then you'd have shims if you have any, then your spacer. And I got my 2 shims on this side. So I'm just going to clean up a little bit. Should go on top. Then your gear goes on. And the orientation we're working with. Right now the big side goes down. And then your other bearing would go on top. I'm going to clean that up just a tad bit more. That race is good. Other bearing goes on top. So that's how it goes back in. I recommend you get a piece of cardboard and put underneath that bearing there. I'm going to wing it without and see how it works and go from there. But that's really the best way to do it. So we're going to get this whole assembly into the case. All nice and lined up. Reach your hand through. Pull it down in. Down to the point everything slides. Push up on your cardstock a little bit. And there we go. We are in. So now the gears are in. You can see right there. Actually, a little more room on the upper side of the case here than I did on the lower. So just a little something to think about when you do yours. Get a little more room on the upper side of the case. You can see how well that's how tight that is in there. Very little play. About just enough room for a piece of cardstock, not cardboard, but cardstock. You know, if you have this stuff with the ribbing in it, it probably won't fit in there, to be honest with you. After that, you're going to take your idler shaft and you're going to install it. A little wiggling and jiggling may be in order. We're going to put some oil on this. I got my wonderful lubricating can of 30 weight. There we go. That'll just give us a little bit of lubrication. There we go. Now we went in further. And a couple taps and we'll be in. Okay. Okay, now that is flush. Since that is flush, we can install our washer and our nut. So I didn't show you actually that was sitting flush, but you tap the idler shaft in until it is actually flush. You install your idler shaft and your nut. Some people paint these before they start putting things back together. I'm not really worried about that. I'm going to actually paint it all once it's assembled, just because I'm going for just having everything underneath black. You know, kind of hides dirt and whatnot. There's a torque spec on this and your input nuts. Most people will wind up just running them on with a impact gun, but if you want to follow the torque spec, you can. I don't have that offhand at this time, so you'd be on your own to find that. However, it's not too hard to find. There's a couple good references out there with that information. So now we have the idler gear in. We can start assembling anything else we need to assemble. The next thing you want to do is find a bigger workbench. Alright. Put this up again on the blocks. There we go. I'm going to put this plate on. This is the retainer plate for the idler shaft. There's 3 holes and it just lines up with them. And there are some smaller bolts here. Kind of crud encased, but the part that's functional is functional, so you know the outside's clean. So you put your smaller bolts in, and you tighten them down. There's no crucial torque spec on that. It's like I think it's 15 to 20 foot-pounds, so it is you know, just snug them up pretty good. We're going to go get a socket quick and be right back. Okay, YouTube, I'm back with a socket, and we're going to put our final little bolt in. And then just snug them up. Actually, my mistake, I forgot. Probably one of the most crucial parts here is there is actually a gasket for this. I haven't opened the gasket kit yet. Here's our gasket kit we got. It has all the gaskets and seals. I really forget how much this ran, but I found them all over the internet. Anything from like 20, 30 bucks on up to like 90 bucks. So there's a load of gaskets here, which we will use probably most of them actually. The PTO cover gasket's also in there. I did not pull that. That is down here. Mine wasn't leaking and it was clean, so why mess with success there is kind of the theory. Okay, we put our gasket on, and there we go. You can install these dry, you can install them with a sealant. You know, it's not going to really matter either way. They will work dry, but a sealant will make them more permanent there, so. Alright, before I put some sealer on this, you can see there's the idler shaft, there's your gasket, and here's your plate. From what I recall, the plate orientates this way with that flat spot over there, due to the fact that this the lower output housing is going to be in this general vicinity. So that being said, have that oriented there. I do have my gasket maker, so we're going to get the gasket done up. A little bit on both sides, very, very thin coatings, usually all you're going to need. First I'm going to find a relatively clean and relatively small rag, hopefully. Well, I want small, but not really clean. It'll function. You just go ahead and put a little dab here, a little dab there. And work your thin coating around. Maybe needs a little more. There we go. You want pretty much just enough to change the color of the gasket. You know, that's kind of the way to go. Whatever sealant you're using, use a thin enough coating that's going to change the color of the gasket, but you don't want so much that it's a heavy gooped up mess, especially with things like this. That idler shaft doesn't actually spin, but the rest of the assembly does have, you know, some movement here and there, and you don't want to worry about that. So let's see if we can get you a little better angle. So now I have that on there. Mirror light coating. And you gotta bear with me a little bit. This can is, I don't know, about half empty and not in the greatest condition. But it's what I had laying around. So then you can take your rag, spread it out a little bit. It will move your gasket some, so try to hold it down as much as possible. Again, just a light coating, as thin and light as you can. And then wheel your gasket back into place. Put your top piece on, line up all the holes, and start your bolts. Now what I'm using here for the gasket maker is the right stuff. Set that up here so you can take a look and see. There we go. I use that on a lot of stuff. It's really, really good. I mean, I've used this on valve covers with the old style cork gaskets that always leak. I've used it on them before without any actual gasket. You know, use it as its own gasket. So it seals up pretty good. I'm just snugging all these up a little bit past finger tight, and I'm gonna let the gasket maker do its thing. After this video is done and it's had its setup time of about 15 minutes, if I recall, we're gonna go ahead and actually tighten all the bolts. But whenever you're using a gasket maker, if it's on a gasket like I just did here, you're good. Tighten them up. Most of the time, you're going to be fine. Like I said, the gasket itself will seal. However, if you're using just a gasket maker and no actual gasket, you're going to have some issues, and your best way to go with that procedure would be to just go ahead and let it sit for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then tighten the bolts up. You know, so get it in place, snug them down so you know everything's good. Let it sit 5-10 minutes, and then tighten them to whatever torque spec you have, and that'll keep the gasket material from squishing out the edges. Okay, so we've had a little bit for our gasket to dry there. We're just going to go here and give it another little bit of tightening. You know, not much, just start compressing stuff and get them snugged up. And that's good, that's done. So next step is to install the shifter rails. I actually did not show taking these out because I forgot about them. So that being said, we do need to install them to go ahead and get the shift forks in. So what we want to do, let me see here. First we got to reorient this. If you look in here, these are your shifter rail holes. You have a hole in the side of the piece there that you can see this will slide into. You want to slide it in and the whole way past. So you have pretty much free access on the hole. It actually goes across between the two holes here. And I'll try to see if I can get you a better view of that once I get these two in. So it would actually not be a bad idea to put some oil on these too. Pardon the poor lighting in the case. You can see the rail right here. There's another one up top. There's the hole. There's the hole you can see where the rail slides through. And there's another angle of it showing the rail right here. So you can push it the whole way through. It goes in and out on either side. So those are your shifter rails. Once you have those in place, you want to slide them past the hole so you can fit your other shifter rails, or shifter rods, whatever you want to call them. The actual part that moves the shifter fork. Now that our rails are in place, we need to remove these seals here. These are your shifter rail seals, shifter selector seals, whatever you want to call them. Put it in underneath and pry up. There we go. So big screwdriver works. In, underneath, and pry up. We have those removed. There's our old seals. We can toss those out. Get ourselves our cleanest rag we have laying around. And just clean any dirt and grime out of there. I still got some fluid from the parts washer and whatnot in there. We're going to get all that out. Get it nice and clean. Okay. So that's nice and clean. Go over to our bag of goodies. In the bag of goodies is new seals. You have two different sides. This is the inside, that is the outside. So the flat part goes up. These are rubberized, which is nice. And normally you'd have a seal driver of some sort. If you're decent at this, you can install them just like I did there. Make sure they're nice and flush, nothing protrudes too far. Okay, so after your seals are installed, as you can see here, we're going to gather up our shift rails and our shift forks. So it's now time to install the shift rails and the shift forks. We have the forks right here. And here's your two rails. Okay, so this is probably the most complicated part of this install. This wants to come out. There we go. First thing you want to do, like I said earlier when we were discussing the detent rails in there, is you want to go ahead and make sure they're pushed in enough that you're going to have enough room to fit your shift rail through. So you have a high and a low a range rail, and then you have a four-wheel drive and a two-wheel drive rail. The long one is your four-wheel drive, two-wheel drive rail. You're going to position it with the detent notches up, these three right here. So these are going to go facing towards the inside of the case. I'm just going to put it in a little bit. And I still have the roll pins and the shift forks here. We will get those the rest of the way out because they need to be out. Okay, YouTube, that really was not near as bad as it looked. I did find a quite easy way to do this. I will need a punch though. And I will explain that here in one moment after I finish driving the pin the rest of the way in. The shaft, I'm not sure what I said earlier. It seems the long end goes towards the shaft. There we go. Okay, yep, the hole is where it needs to be on the whole axis ordeal. But I need to move it so now I have the hole lined up. And that lined up like perfect, I think. Huh. It would appear that way. We shall see. Yep, I just got very, very, very lucky actually. And everything lined right up. So because of that, I won't be able to actually use my awesome technique to line things up, but I will take a moment and explain it to you. What I wound up doing is I took this little screwdriver from inside the case, found the hole in the shift fork, which I'm not able to find for some reason right now, and then rotated the shaft until things lined up. So my hole's lined up. I don't have to do that. Go ahead underneath, get that kind of in place enough. I can get that roll pin started. There we go. A few taps, and then drive it home. But I use a screwdriver to line everything up from the inside of the case on the other one, and that worked out. That worked out pretty well. Got everything lined up nice and easy. Didn't have any real major issues. So now we're gonna double check and make sure we're seated, which we are. So those two are good to go. We now need our input gear assembly. Okay, YouTube. You will need your slider ring for your, it goes on your shift fork. You'll need your input gear and your input bearing. You're not going to see the input bearing side of this, but it'll add up. Take your input gear, spline in first, put it in, and maneuver it till it goes into place. Next, take your slider ring, put that on. You'll probably have to hold it and lift everything into place. While holding it, you're going to take your input bearing, slide it over the shaft, and get it just barely seated in there. I'm going to put a little bit of oil on it just so it goes in. And once everything's holding together, you'll be fine. So you want to tap your input bearing in. There we go. Your range selector should be neutral when you do this, but I mean, ideally anything works. So there we go. Now we have the input shaft in, and I just bumped it back out. Snap ring's only there keeping it from moving too far inward. I didn't take the snap rings off the bearings, but I'll show you on the other bearing. There's a snap ring there. And that snap ring just keeps it from moving too far inward. It's not going to keep it from moving back out. So what I did is when I slid this into place, just to kind of hold everything in, unfortunately we had a disconnect issue. So next part you're going to need would be the rear output assembly. It's the one that matches that. Okay, YouTube. The front output shaft assembly has roller bearings inside. There's a washer and a little spring clip. I use grease to hold the bearings in, put the washer in, and the spring clip. It's really hard to see. I'm not going to get you any pictures of that, unfortunately. I am going to oil up this shaft here a little bit. Hopefully that'll make it slide in a bit easier. And then we're going to get this put together. There we go. So now we're locked in. Input and front output are attached. Now we're going to need our rear housing. This holds your speedometer inside of it. I've removed all that. There will be a plastic gear that will go on here if you are running a mechanical speedometer. I am not. So that is not something I am needing. Put your former gasket on. Grab your putty knife. Spread it out. Nice thin coating, just as before. There you go. And we need our gasket. Again, there's a bump out, same as before. Right here. Matches up with here for the shifter rail. Everything lined up where you need it. Push the gasket down. Actually, I have that upside down. There you go. Now get it lined up as you need it and push the gasket down. I'm going to use the putty knife in this case because I don't want to get gasket material, gasket maker all over my hands. After you have it down, go ahead and grab your gasket maker and put another coat on. And this is kind of like anti-seize. This stuff, it just gets everywhere anytime you decide to use it. So, you know, you can try to keep clean, but it's going to be better off just to wash your hands. Okay, there we go. Spread that out. Nice even coating again. And make sure everything's cleared out as far as the holes go. And we have some roller bearings to put in. So we're going to get some more grease. I'm going to put it in this trough here. And I'll show you what exactly is going on. Okay, so there's some grease. Smear it around. Just enough to make it stick. So there's this little trough right here, you can see right here, where the bearings or roller bearings are going to go in. So we're now going to take our roller bearings, which I currently have in multiple forms. But mainly they're in this baggie. Get them out. Don't drop them all. And make sure they're mildly clean. Start putting them in. These I'm actually going to do a little bit of a wiping off on. Clean them up some. They don't need to be perfectly clean. If there's some oil or grease from before, it's not a big deal. You just want any particulate matter, dirt, dust, and shavings, etc. off of them. I'm going to sit here and put them all in. I have a couple more to clean up there, but I'll get around to those. Once you have a few in, you can kind of push them together. And then that'll help them stand up on their own. Now while I'm doing this, the Forma gasket, Right Stuff gasket maker, is starting to set up. So that being said, when I put this on, I can just tighten it down. I won't need to worry too much about letting it set up like I did with the other parts. I can just tighten it and call it a day, because it's getting its setup time right here as I'm putting these needle bearings in. Okay, we're down to the last few. These are a little dirtier. They fell into the case when I took this apart. And that will be the last one. So you can run your fingers around and give them a nice push in. Sure they're not going to fall out. Like that one did. Alright, I'm going to actually put it in and then rotate it a bunch to make everything line up. So, like that. Very, very carefully, because that is what you do not want to happen. I just unseated one of those roller bearings. Actually, 2 or 3 of them, it looks like 2 of them. So in this case, I'm going to go get a little dab of grease, very, very little one. Make sure I have a nice gap. Put some grease in the gap. Make sure the bearings are clean. And put them right into the grease. There you go. So those 2 fell out. Now they're not going to fall out again. Try that same method here. And we're pretty much in place. Don't have to worry about the bearings, as long as we're careful. Spin that around. And get everything in place where it needs to line up. Okay. Next step here is going to be your bolts. Take them, line them up, and get them started. If you do have any silicone on the end of the bolt from the previous assembly, I'd recommend removing that. One bolt hole is not cooperating. So I'm going to get everything else in to help get them lined up. Gasket could be a little bit off, something to that extent. So like I said, get the rest of them started, everything you can, then work your way around. And one feels like it's starting just a little bit. So this one's got some damage there. I'm going to have to do a little bit of repair to it. As you can see, it's kind of D-shaped from when I was smacking on it. But that's not too big of an ordeal. We can take care of that. Now this one, you do want to try to tighten evenly. There was a little lip on the back you saw. That lip actually seats into the case. So if you're tightening it down and there's some binding, go a little bit further around the circle and try to seat it evenly. I can tell you that one's now seated and tight. Then we'll get this side seated and tight. There you go. And then we can just finish up the rest of the bolts. Some of these bolts are a little mismatched because if you recall, there's a bracket on here that I did not reinstall, simply because I'm not going to need it for how mine's going to be set up. I'm not going to need that bracket, so. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to leave this here slightly D-shaped hole empty. I'm going to go and fix it and repair it later off camera, but I can repair it on the case here without any issues. And if I do have issues and whatnot, I can just leave it as is. This thing's starting to get really heavy. The more parts you add to it, the more weight you're adding. So, you know, one thing to remember on that front. Okay, so all the bolts are now tight. now's when you slide in your speedo gear piece if you need to. That goes on the actual shaft, and then the gear will go in here. I'm going to make a plug to go in there and plug that up. We are going to put on our final retainer. Yes, YouTube, it's almost over. So we're going to put on our final retainer. Get out your form of gasket silicone material. Nice little bead like before. And then smooth it out. Nice and smooth. Key with using a forma gasket type product is to cover the entire surface with it. You know, you don't want any little gaps or spaces it's not covering. You know, once in a while it'll not be a big deal, but most of the time it's enough concern to actually make a difference. Again, this has that oil drain, so we're going to orient the gasket with the oil drain, put that on. None of these gaskets so far have been side specific, meaning you don't have to put, you know, one end up necessarily, but they are patterned with that oil drain piece there. It's a pattern that is not it's going to only go on one way, so we'll put it that way. I'm going to smother that up, spread it out. Now in this case, this gasket's a little bigger than the metal flange below it. You can see it sticking up. So I'm going to have some spots of the gasket that are not going to be completely covered. If there's a flange there, you want that coverage is what it really comes down to. Wherever the flange is, make sure you have your coverage. And the little spots inside, well, on the outside, the little spots there won't really affect anything. So there we go. We're going to find our drain hole right here. It's going to match up with nothing on the case actually, but I do like to put those down when there's nothing on the case. And we're going to find ourselves a bolt or two. Because it looks like, YouTube, I'm starting to run out of bolts. That means we must be close to being done. Make sure your gasket's lined up too. It's a little off, but we'll make her work. Actually, it looks like this one may be pattern specific for how it goes on, so we'll have to see that. Let's check. Yep. So the orientation, actually, that's more my mistake than anything else. The orientation is going to only allow you to put it on properly with the drain hole down. However, there is no drain hole in the case, which means this particular application that's not needed. I'm not liking that bolt. That thing's really, really corroded. We'll leave that one out for now also. I'll take care of that in a little bit. We do have a couple more. That'll work. For some reason, must be because I'm close to done, this one's actually a little more of a pain than the rest of them. Okay, there we go. Now we're going to start tightening them down. I'll just snug them up, sorry, just snug them up. So that way the gasket material has time to seat. Time to set. So you just want to seat the gasket is all. This one, the bolts seem to be a little tighter on. Might be because I didn't clean it. Might be because the holes are a little smaller tolerance on this particular piece here. I'm not sure. But we're going to make it work either way. If it starts getting tough, we'll probably need washers. If it starts getting tough, you can go ahead and go to another bolt. Everything should get a little bit easier there if you go to a different bolt. Okay, I may have to look into other bolts for this. I'm not sure at this point in time. You know, all that came out were the same, and I'm working out of a pile where it's a pile of what came out. So I'm not sure what we're running into here. I may have to clean out the threads. We will deal with that at another time and proceed forward with the video. Here's our 1410 yoke. It's going to go on. A little bit of a rubber mallet. There you go. And then don't forget, you have your little rubber gaskets here. Seat that in. And you can put your nut on. I didn't bother cleaning up the nuts very much, but if you wanted to, you could. Just want to make sure that seating surface on the bottom is clean. That's less stuff you have to squish out of there when you go to tighten it down. Okay, so that's tight enough for now. We'll tighten that. I'll tighten that later. Okay, so I had to run out and get a special set of snap ring pliers to get that snap ring back on. I was just trying to take off. Don't take that off. Just don't, please. It was a nightmare, nothing but a nightmare. There's a bunch of little bearings in there, roller bearings. So if you don't have to take it off, don't take it off. I'm not even going to cover it because in most cases you won't have to take that off. And I just wound up cleaning out the hole from the inside anyway. So that being said, the rear output shaft assembly is not in. We're going to work on the front output shaft assembly, which goes in this hole here. So here it is, front output shaft assembly. You need the top three parts, which is a little washer on top, the big gear, and the clutch slider. Those are going to go in first. Okay, you could put your bearing in first from behind, which is right here. And just put it in the hole. But there we go. I'm not going to do it that way because of this little washer here. So the washer can come off, go with the bearing. Want to put this gear in, put it in the hole, and work it around your fork there. And then your shifter ring slider can go in, and if you got some skills, you can lock them together. Make sure your clutch fork's the whole way out to kind of hold it in place, which it is. So there's the first part of the assembly. Second part is the rest of everything. Simply take that and put it through the hole and work it into place. You will have to turn it to mesh the gears, but there we are in place. Now you go to the other side for you, YouTube. Okay, so the bearing's in. Got that tapped in. Now we have our end plate that we need to put in. The big knob matches up with where the shift rail goes. There is a gasket for that. So we can go through our pile of gaskets and see what matches up. This particular kit has gaskets for a bunch of different setups, so they may or may not all work for your transfer case. That one may do it, or that one. No, that one's not right. So that's a big one. A couple small ones. Should be the two small ones. Hold your gasket up. Make sure all the bolt holes line up, which they do. So we're going to cover this in a little bit of our goop again. The goop has semi-hardened. Actually, in this case, because it'll be easier, we're going to put the goop on the plate. Just normal form of gasket, nothing special. This is the right stuff. As I mentioned earlier, I use this on everything. Okay. Should be an adequate amount for my gasket. There's a bolt I'll have to find. And you take your rag, smear it around so you get a nice thin coating the whole way around. You can also use your finger or a screwdriver or really whatever you feel like. In this particular setup, don't have to worry too much about the internal section. Right around this lip, just worry about the outer section. It'll be adequate. So take your good old time. Get this all on there. That rag's getting pretty nasty. So there we go. Have that covered. Take our gasket. Lay our gasket over top. Gently push on it a little bit to get it to start to stick. And move it into place where it needs to be. There we go. Now, I'm going to repeat the process for the other side. And I'm going to wind up doing this one with the putty knife. You just take your putty knife and drag it out, nice thin layer. Notice your gasket move a little bit. Go ahead and start pulling the other way. Want to get this top part up by the shift rail. Nice thin coating up there. The reason I usually don't use a putty knife is because you will usually get some of it in the holes with a putty knife, and then you have to go and kind of pull it out. You don't want that just, you know, freely floating around inside of anything. And if you do have too much of this in there, you can pretty much have an issue with your bolt. We're going to put some oil on this bearing. Inside here there's roller bearings. You can see them. Let's put some oil on them. But if you use too much of that gasket maker, you can have issues with your bolts where the bolt will bottom out before it's actually tight. That's why I like to clean it out of the holes. A couple of these bolts lined up here. Actually, we're getting them all lined up and in. I always wind up putting all the bolts in and then tightening things down. And that's going to prevent you from tightening things down with one of the bolts slightly askew and then running into that issue in the future. So, make sure everything's going to be tight and the way it needs to be. Same thing as before, you're going to have to go ahead and let it set up some. So right now I'm just going to snug them up. I'm going to start with kind of a crisscross pattern. There we go. Just enough that you have the gasket materials touching. This one you can see had some silicone from before on it. New process on these cases uses a silicone sealant, so that's why I'm using this. If you recall in the teardown portion of the video, I did mention these bolts having Loctite on them. I don't think that's going to be crucial. I'm not going to put it back on. I have some laying over there, but I'm not taking them all out to put it back on. So if you want to put Loctite on yours, feel free. I've had a bunch of these off before on different transfer cases and whatnot that had Loctite and didn't re-Loctite them, and it wasn't a losing situation there in any way. So Hadn't had any problems with not Loctiting either. So we're going to get this on. You don't have to do a full crisscross pattern. There's really no specific pattern to this. I like to do kind of like a crisscross or star pattern just because it'll tighten things evenly, and it helps to get all the bolts properly located and not have excess pressure on one end that's going to ooze out your gasket material when it does get to the point where it's you know, compressed a bit. And you could wait to do this part here. The reason I'm doing it now is because I want to have that assembly held in pretty well without the bearing and everything sliding out. So since that assembly's in, there we go. I have to tighten these up later in 5 minutes or so once everything's good to go there. We're going to keep going on this lower side of the case, and we're going to move around to the front output shaft area. You got these setups here, little retainers. So what I'm going to do, what I've already done is I've popped the seals out and put new seals in. These get gaskets on them and go right on. The gaskets are over here in the kit. Find them. There's actually 3 of these on a divorce setup. 2 of them are square, and 1 of them is a 5-point pattern. 5-point pattern goes on the rear output shaft on that. So I'm going to cover that with some goop, put the gasket on, and put more goop on. There we go. And then, just like last time, putty knife it out to a nice thin layer. So there we go. That little U part always faces down towards the bottom of the case, because that's actually a drain back. A lot of the time the case will have a matching hole in it. This one does right here. So we're going to go ahead and put that on just like that, and then find the holes and start our 4 bolts. Okay, bolts are started. We can go ahead and start snugging things up. Again, just snug, don't need to go hardcore on it. Just get it to the point where it slightly compresses things, you know. Particular bolts going in a little bit tight, but nothing to be concerned about. And again, I'm doing the crisscross pattern. You don't have to, but it's kind of a nice thing to do, simply because it helps seat everything more evenly. So there we go. And now it's been a few minutes, so I'm just going to go over to this other side, snug up all these bolts. Then just give them a quick little double check. Make sure they're still tight. Because a lot of the time you'll tighten things down, they'll tighten kind of unevenly there. So now that's done. That's going to be for the front drive shaft, so that will be the first truly new part, which is not right there, which is right here, 1350 yoke. Now we can go ahead and put that on, because I feel like putting it on. It gives a good handhold and such. Rubber mallet. I should make sure, yeah. Sometimes yokes are specifically keyed. They will have a, a key weight in them that will have to be used to line things up. This one is not like that. Just some tapping is all that's needed. Okay, so that's pretty well on there. There is a little one of these things. It's like spiky rubber washer. In the kit, there's actually a bunch of them. They go in here. They're like a seal. And then your nut can go on. So now we have a 1350 yoke on the front of our 205 transfer case, Divorce 205. Like I said, this nut here is going to be the same as that nut. I'm going to torque it all at a later date. Just for simplicity's sake, pretty much. So that is in there. It's seated pretty well. Torque that down later. And we can get on to, we'll do these upper pieces here. So after your rails are in, you have your two balls, the little ball bearings. Drop one in each. Make sure they're down in there. You have these pieces here, the bolts with the springs on them, if you recall them from before. This one's kind of dirty, so I'm going to clean it up with a rag a little bit. And then you can put those in. And with ever so slight pressure, you can put them in and get them seated. Sounds like Charlie may be back. If he is, that's awesome. Because I need the special snap rings for these. They're not really special. They're just ones I don't have here. So he ran out quick to get them for me, which we'll have to owe him a big thank you here, guys. There's the other one. So there we go. Nice and getting cleaned up. And we'll put that in. And then I'll go get the snap rings. Get that shaft reassembled. Get these tightened down. And we'll be good to go on that front. One quick thing before we get to what I missed is these two plugs here. You remember we knocked out of these holes. You can put those in also. They're kind of like a block plug. Just go ahead and get yourself a punch of some sort. Put them in place. And a few hits. Then they'll seat it. So, a metal hammer would work a little better with that. So I'm going to go get this snap ring I need. Snapping pliers I need, and then get this put back together. Now we need the other 4-piece, which we're going to put on the front output for you there. I mean, sorry, the front input. Sorry, input. This is the input. This is the output here. The input's going to be a 1410 yoke. You saw before I compared them, so to make sure everything fits, which it does, which is good. And we're going to put it together. So we need our gasket again. 4-bolt gasket. I'm going to smear a little bit of gasket sealer on here. Okay, there we go. Grab our putty knife, smooth it out. Always thin coating again. Remember, they're same thing as this one. There's a little notch. You need to match up the little notch. You put your gasket on. Move everything into place where it needs to be. And put more gasket sealer on the top. Smooth it all out. It's nice and smooth. You could go around, scrape off any excess that may have oozed out the edges. Right here is your drain hole. Has to locate with that drain section, so it goes on just like this and in. Grab yourself your bolts. There's 4 of them, just like the other one, and get them started. Again, there's some silicone on this bolt. Pull that off, and a little bit of the gasket material got in the hole, so clear that out. There we go. Getting started. If you recall, we have not tightened these yet, so we'll just tighten them down. And then we'll get these snugged up and let that gasket material sit for you. one more bolt. Alright, there we go. That is together, and we're gonna get this wrapped up pretty soon here. We have one more yoke to do. This is another 1410 yoke. Doing a 1410 yoke for the rear shaft and for the input on this. They're both going to be 1410s. The 1350 right here is going to go to the front shaft because it doesn't see near as much power as the other two will. And if I break a front shaft, I'd rather break a U-joint there than break it further down and have things go a lot crazier. So you put that nut on to retain that yoke. We have our linkage bar. Remember how that came out? Cotter pins and these retaining pins. I'm going to clean this up before I put it on. We won't show that on the video. But last thing to finish up the video is going to be our fancy mounting bushings. There we go. Two-piece bushing design, you can see. All you do is you put the square one on. And you get your mounting bracket. Put your mounting bracket on. Actually, we'll go this way. Top bushings. Oh, that's what it is, yeah. Washers here. They come with it also. Put your washers on. And then your nuts. After you run the nuts down, you put a cotter pin through them, just like you would with a tie rod end or a ball joint, and then you're mounted up there. Washers that come with this aren't perfect, could be a little better, but that'll isolate that transfer case and get everything good to go. So there's part of what I've been doing YouTube. 1410 U-joint yokes and 1350 yokes on a NP205 transfer case. Got it all cleaned up and everything. This process took me about a week, working here and there. A lot of time spent cleaning it up, you know. So that being said, it's something you can easily do in a weekend in your own garage without any or much help. You know, you might need someone to help you get it out, but there we go. It's all rebuilt and needs a couple more things, like I said, to tighten the nuts up, which I'll do off camera. Get them torqued to spec and everything, and then we can go ahead and make some mounts and put it in the dolly, which is horribly shown because my garage is small. Well, YouTube, thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe to Peterson Auto.